My name is Kate Gallup. I'm the Reverend Dr. Chaplain Coordinator for the Massachusetts State Police. Thank you all for listening. This is such an important ministry and outreach, and I just wish more people had this. So if you are listening right now, please share it with your departments, your troopers, your agencies, your officers. It really makes a difference. I just want to say it's such an honor and privilege to be here with more amazing chaplains and to do this work, and I love what I do every day. How many people can say that? So I am very grateful for this.
I like that. That's excellent.
Thank you so much.
Good job.
Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is about talking to police officers who say, "Hey Chaplain, I've got a story to tell and some hard-earned wisdom to share." The guests on Hey Chaplain come from across the world, from the LAPD to Scotland Yard. They are sharing their wisdom so that you don't have to learn it the hard way. And as a patrol chaplain, I think that you deserve to hear something that is positive and encouraging. This is part 2 of my recent conversation with Jake, the International Security Specialist guy. And if you haven't already listened to episode 138, or when Jake was on the show last year in episode 117, then stop what you're doing right now and go back and catch those episodes. In this portion, we are talking more about contingency planning with your family. The specific context is, what do you do when you're separated from your teenagers during an emergency in a foreign country? But really, this is practical advice for an emergency anywhere, and even in a situation that's not a crisis yet, but requires some guidance so that your teen is prepared. Here's Jake, the International Security Specialist guy.
As you look to be prepared for these situations, one of the things you want to do is what we would call contingency planning. A lot of contingency planning is forecasting actions and behaviors when there is no communication.
Okay.
And we're more talking now about what if, when something happens, you are separated from your family members. You're on this side of town, they're on this side of town, or for whatever reason, you become separated in an emergency. Having a plan for this type of situation, it's very helpful, and also it can lower anxiety.
So this is like talking to your kids about a house fire and how to get out and where to meet outside, right?
That's part of it. That's part of it. You have safety training that you would do, which is what you're describing for a fire.
Okay.
And by the way, I think safety training is a great way to start preparing kids versus security training.
Right.
So with safety training, we can talk about natural disasters and different emergencies. And, there's not that threat actor that we're discussing with family members and things like that. So I'm a big fan of starting your young family on safety training and then moving into security training. But a lot of it does cross over for sure.
Okay.
We can talk about satellite phones and in-reach devices and all these ways to stay in communication.
Define that term, in-reach device. What do you mean by that for people who don't know?
In-reach device is a Garmin. Yeah, it's a Garmin device that is basically satellite messaging.
Okay.
Versus voice calls.
Okay.
I have these devices. I travel with them sometimes. We could talk about other things like AirTags and tracking apps and all that stuff. But at a basic level, if there is an emergency and you reach out to try to get a hold of another travel partner, team member, family member, and they're not communicating back to you, it's probably not because you got a message on your phone that says the government shut the cell phones off. That happens. But most likely it's because that other family member has their volume turned down.
Right.
Or their phone's dead.
Yeah.
And your cell phone is your primary means of communication when you're traveling. And I start talking about panic or paranoia. I'm one of those guys that when my cell phone gets to 80%, I start becoming paranoid and start looking for a charger. You have, my wife is on the other end of the bell curve.
Right.
And she runs around on 6-7% and just completely happy.
See, that gives me anxiety. I can't
Yeah.
stand that. Yeah.
So as a great stocking stuffer Christmas gift, because by the way, guys, we should be putting stuff in the stockings too.
Yeah. Yeah.
A battery bank is a great stocking stuffer for this type of thing, because if you have that on you, then you're very likely to be able to keep your phone charged. If it's fine when you're in your hotel room and you can plug the thing in, you'll probably have power, but you may not want to be in your hotel room. You may want to be on the roof so you can see what's happening.
Yeah.
You may want to be traveling to the airport.
Right.
You may be hiding somewhere if there is some kind of a crisis, and it's pretty stressful to be sending messages and receiving messages and getting information, and then you're watching that phone slowly die, and you know you're going to lose that.
Yeah. The last few times I've traveled with my my kids, my teenagers and adult kids, I hand them each a battery bank. I'm just like, here, this is yours for the next week, and keep this with you.
Now you got an improvised weapon with you too.
That's true. That's true. That's a heavy little item that you could use to your advantage. That's right.
So I'm a big fan of having that because it makes a big difference. But this does us no good if we reach out and we're not getting a response back in an emergency. And so a lot of times when we'll go to a mall or a market overseas or something like that, and we know we're going to split up, it's me being the leader of the group or the leader of the family that just tells everybody, okay, let's turn the volumes up on our phone.
Yeah.
And doing that one simple thing greatly increases your chances of being able to communicate, not just in an emergency, but just when you're trying to come back together and gain accountability to eat lunch or do anything else.
Yeah.
So this is a great starting point because you can also use tracking apps. I mean, people feel differently about that. But tracking apps, they can lower anxiety or they can increase anxiety.
Right.
I think a lot of times when you just put the kid on the tracking app, they learn that, you know what, they know where I'm at, so I don't need to look at my phone and it's fine. That's a very family cultural thing. I think tracking apps can be good if you're running in different directions because there's some kind of explosion or some kind of emergency or something's happening. And maybe I can look on the phone and see where my kid is or my spouse, and I can go find them even if they're not answering the phone. But they have limitations.
Sure.
And if you're looking at a situation where there is no phone, whether you ran from your table and you left your bag sitting there in an emergency, or the government has shut the cell tower down, or the cell tower no longer exists based on what's happening, now you're looking at contingency planning, or what we would say establishing emergency meeting locations.
Yeah. My family, we had 4 of us in a town in Mexico we'd never been to, and we're in this kind of central plaza area, and there's food vendors and people coming in, setting up for concerts and just coming and going and whatever, stores to disappear into. And we're like, look, this big Christmas tree thing, we're all meeting back here. And so this is where we're going to. And that's your classic rally point, right?
Yeah. And we did this instinctively throughout human history, but somehow we've lost this with our modern technology.
It's so simple, so basic, but it's. I mean, and we picked the tallest thing in the plaza. It's like, okay, from everywhere, if you can step outside, you can see this giant Christmas tree thing. This is visible from blocks away. Come here. This is where we're meeting before we leave.
That would be what we would call a good primary meeting place or rally point.
Okay.
And that's great if that is a safe place.
But it might not be,
because in almost all cases it will.
Too visible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it's a great primary meeting place for most emergencies, but if we're really getting into contingency planning, sometimes it's good to have a secondary one that meets a different need if there's more of a physical threat in that area. In other words, if the Christmas tree isn't safe, where else are we going to meet up? And now you're looking for different features. You may be looking for somewhere that has cover, concealment, a place to hide, or there's better security still in that nearby area.
Okay. So instead of out in the plaza, you may be like, no, we're going to meet back behind this church, or we're going to meet down in that basement shoe store, or
somewhere that you can get to easily at night, that maybe you could get to even if you had a limited injury, that you can find.
Okay. So not up 10 flights of stairs.
Right.
Okay.
Highly visible is great if we're trying to find each other.
Right.
But highly visible in that area may not be good if people are being targeted.
Right. Yeah.
So just having that secondary place can be very helpful. And then, you could also think about having your hotel, for instance, as a third meeting place or rally point. In other words, if we're trying to get on the train and one of us doesn't make it for whatever reason, but we don't have any communication, because if we have the phone, it's fine. I'm just going to reach out and text you, and we're going to make a plan, and we're going to find each other. Send me a pin on the map, and I'll come to you. Okay, that's easy. But when you're traveling, like you said, sometimes people don't have cell service. A lot of times I'd travel, I'd have a SIM card, but my kids wouldn't.
Right.
It's okay, they're with me. Well, it's great when you have accountability, but you can lose that very easily. And so, we may not be at the market. We may be on our way to the market, and now we've been separated. What do I want them to do in that situation? And what you really want is to find a place where the most vulnerable member of your family can be comfortable, safe, and happy. Because they may be there for a few hours, a little while. You could pick any place that would be a good place for that, but maybe your hotel would be a good, solid option.
Yeah.
And then do they have the capabilities of getting to that location? Do they need to carry some local currency so they can pay for a cab? Do they need a credit card? Do they need a rideshare app?
See, that's what I was going to say. So many times you may have teenagers that be like, oh, we want to go do our own thing. And it's like, okay, but if we get separated and you had to get back to the hotel, you don't have the proper money. You don't have the proper communication. You don't know, the proper knowledge to get back to the hotel. So no, you can't be by yourself in this particular situation.
But if they were unexpectedly, then how are they going to mitigate that when they can't call and ask you for something and they're on their own?
Yeah. What would you do in that situation?
Well, first they need to know where you want them to go.
Okay.
So that you can find them again. And that's the point of setting up a meeting place or a rally point. And then you're just looking at, how do they get there? So here's another option. My son, he went, oh gosh, how much of this story can I tell? He went deep in the jungle somewhere where there was a lot of risk, and in the end, he had a heat stroke. Hiking in. He has a backpack on. He's traveling for days. And
how old?
I think he was 8. He was 18.
Okay.
And we didn't hear from him. He was with a group of people we knew he was with. We had some contact with them, peripherally, but we didn't hear from him for 3 days, which we sort of expected. But once he got there, so in the end, he had a heat stroke. He was carried down to a river and dunked in the river to cool him off before he could be carried to a bamboo hospital. And they have a thing called a bambulance. And this is where they take a piece of bamboo and then a hammock, and you get 5 or 6 guys to just rotate and take turns and carry somebody. So he's in a very remote place. But when they dunked him in the river, his cell phone slipped out of his pocket and ended up at the bottom of the river. He's okay now. He wakes up in the hospital, and it's a very, very remote hospital, but it's, the problem is he doesn't have a cell phone. And he hikes back down to the river and actually amazingly found his phone. I've been to that river because I went into the jungle soon after. And it's a fast moving river, but somehow he found it. Well, and amazingly, after 3 or 4 days, it dried out and started working again.
Oh, wow.
Which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
now here he is. He's at a satellite location to where he could sign in and send me a message, but his phone doesn't work. So he doesn't remember his password to his email. And I don't think he knew my phone number.
Right.
And I don't think he knew the password to his email. So he just figures it out how to communicate with me all on his own. And I receive an email from a stranger's email. And the headline is, "This is your son, Hunter." So I see an email I don't recognize, but I see, "This is your son, Hunter." And I open it up and there's the message. "Hey, here's where I am. This is what happened to me."
Wow.
So even if this was instructive to me, because I thought, in 2026, it really doesn't matter where you are on the planet. There is a way that you can communicate. And even if your primary phone, your primary is your phone and that's not working, if nothing else, if you just tell them, "Hey, go somewhere where there's a coffee shop and internet and Wi-Fi."
Yeah.
And he knew my email address, and that was all he needed to send me a message from a stranger's phone.
Wow.
So this is contingency planning that, you could role play this with a kid or just tell them what you expect them to do if something happens.
What would you put in your kids' hands besides a battery bank? Assuming they already have a phone. What else do they need to have in their hands?
Well, we have a shared email account. The whole family shares an email. I created it just so we could put virtual copies of important documents and things in there.
Oh.
So everybody has that.
Okay.
Everybody has access to copies of their passport and different things that we may need for just basic travel, basic emergencies. I can put everything in there from, who I want them to contact in an emergency to medical information, whatever could be important that they may need to access virtually.
So there's a shared Google email, and connected to that email is a Google Drive, where there's, Google Docs of all these things. That's a great idea.
Yeah. And so whatever you decide to put in there is up to you. But I mean, we use that all the time, just accessing basic travel documents to apply for visas, to, anything like that.
That's excellent. Okay.
Just drop it in.
So let me ask a different question. Instead of what you put in their hands, what do you put in their minds? It sounds like they need to have memorized at least a phone number or a, Google Drive account. They need to know that name and that Google account and that password to get to access that.
Traditionally, people will say memorize a phone number when you're traveling, because if your phone's taken away, we don't memorize phone numbers anymore.
No.
And I think it's good to memorize a phone number, but if they're going to go up to a stranger and try to use their phone, are they going to be able to make a call to that number? And so, as simple as it is, I'm real big on at least memorize my email.
Yeah.
Because if both of us have Wi-Fi, we can send emails.
Yeah.
And I want them to memorize their password so that they can access their information.
Yeah. So they can access their email on a different device.
Yeah.
If they have to borrow a device, can I get into my own email? Right. And a lot of people can't because they don't memorize anything anymore. They don't memorize passwords, don't memorize phone numbers. But
even if they know your email, they can email you from someone else's email. Yeah. But you have to expect that may happen, or you're not going to open an email that you don't see or trust.
Well, I guarantee you the police department IT people are all telling you, do not open emails from people you don't recognize.
Right. And this is where it was so helpful with my son, where he just put in, "This is your son, Hunter."
Yes.
The necessity of solving the problem led him to a genius solution that in hindsight seems so simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, but it was not in any of my contingency planning prior to him doing it, and nobody had ever discussed it with me. But he needed to communicate, and he figured out how to do it.
That's awesome.
And also, I was in the Middle East during a crisis, and I had my satellite device and I had my eSIM. Well, the settings were not working on my eSIM. And because of that, I didn't have a local SIM card and I didn't have an eSIM. So I had no connection, and I needed to activate my satellite inReach device when I was in the country. And I couldn't do that without Wi-Fi. And I couldn't do it without line of sight to the sky. So I had to go outside where I lost my Wi-Fi. Now I can't connect my inReach device, and the Wi-Fi on my phone is not working, so I can't pair with my phone. It's like, okay, I don't have any way to communicate. In hindsight, I realized, wait a minute, my cab driver has WhatsApp.
Yeah.
He would be more than happy for me to make a phone call, but I didn't even think about it because I just thought, well, my phone's not working, my satellite device is not working. But if I would have had a number written down or memorized, and the person I was trying to contact had either a Signal app or WhatsApp as opposed to just a phone number,
right,
I could communicate very easily. And so it is good to have a phone number memorized, especially if you're using something like WhatsApp that'll work anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Because almost everybody around the world uses WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And there may be some sensitive information I don't want to put out on WhatsApp, but as far as basic communication goes, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the preferred texting app almost everywhere except the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
And so start looking at other people as resources. Yeah, and so having, whether you think you're going to have an international phone plan or you're going to get a local SIM card or an eSIM, don't rely on, regular text messaging and phone calls.
Yeah. With
your family members back home and people you're traveling with, use something like WhatsApp or Signal so that it'll work on Wi-Fi no matter what. Yeah. And someone else doesn't need to have an American phone plan to be able to contact you.
Awesome. All right. So once again, I'm going to cut the conversation right there. I still have about another third of this conversation covering some more great topics, specifically how to shelter in place in a hotel and relocate while in another country. But I'm just going to set that aside and use that in maybe a future bonus episode. It'll also be fun to see if I'm ever able to reveal Jake's true identity. I promised him just a little bit of anonymity while he was on the show because some of his work is sensitive in certain countries and with certain groups. But if Jake is able to move back to the United States in the future and maybe is not actively working in those things that are still time sensitive, then we'll bring Jake back on, reveal his identity, and share more really great stories because he has a lot of great stories. Until then, we'll just express our undying gratitude to Jake, the International Security Specialist Guy. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
9/11 turned out to be our son's first day of kindergarten. And, this story is not special at all for all of us that went through that day, but everybody's story is unique. And a neighbor called me and said, "Hey, you got to turn on the TV. This is crazy." And like everybody else, I was just absolutely stunned and rocked and astonished and grieving. And I remember seeing a photograph. It was an iconic photograph of this man and woman jumping off the top of one of the towers, and they were holding hands. And I heard anecdotally that they did not know each other prior. They were just two strangers sharing this final moment together. And there's something inside of me. It was almost like survivor guilt. It was like, there but for the grace of God go I. And the other reaction I had was, oh, hell no. Yeah. No, this shall not stand. No way, this shall not stand. I was 48 at the time, wanted in the fight in the worst way, called all the armed services recruiters, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army, and they're like, how old are you?
They weren't desperate enough to start taking 48-year-olds.
Exactly. Of course, when I told them my age, the next thing they said was, "Well, try the Coast Guard."
All of our coasties will appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but even the Coast Guard said, "You're too old, man. You're just too old." So shortly thereafter, I remember reading in, I lived in a suburb of LA at the time, Burbank, California. And I remember reading in this local paper that a lot of these Burbank coppers were getting called up. They were in the Armed Forces Reserve and they were called up to active duty. So they were looking for coppers.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, let's pray for peace in our city.